All right, good afternoon, everybody. Like I said, my name is Chris Ryan. I'm with Local Government Risk Management Services. I've been with the company for about 13 years now, but beforehand, I was actually the county clerk HR director for about 5 years with the Sumter County Board of Commissioners in Americus, Georgia. I have a master's degree in business and a human resource bachelor's degree at Georgia Southwestern State University. I have the advanced certification in human resource management and the certified county clerk from the Carl Vinson Institute of Government. And like you said, I don't have it on my bio, but if you have any questions, please email me at cryan, R-Y-A-N, at LGRMS.com. So we'll go ahead and get started today. What we're going to be talking about is harassment and discrimination. And as you know, that is illegal. So please, if anything like this is happening in your work environment, make sure that it stops it as soon as you can. So simply having a policy these days is definitely not enough. Employees need to know what sort of conduct they cannot engage in. They need to know what sort of things they don't have to put up with, and they definitely need to know how to report it. And your policy manual is where you're going to find this information. And everybody's policy manual might be a little bit different here and there, but all these things should be in there about how to report it. And just remember, this is actually the one policy that bypasses chain of command. If you don't feel comfortable going to your immediate supervisor, you have an option, and usually it's within your policy that tells you who else you can go to. Most of the time it could be maybe another supervisor, or you can go straight to HR. So that's kind of your options and stuff like that. So if you feel like you need to go to somebody and you can't go to your supervisor, this policy will allow you to do that. So the things that make us unique are the things we like to pick on each other about. Are you too tall, too short? Do you wear glasses? Do you not wear glasses? Are you maybe the oldest or the youngest employee in the workplace? Well, a lot of times we usually hear this: I wish that old man would hurry up and retire. He's just taking up space. Now, a lot of people say, well, you know, everybody's just kind of joking around sometimes, but that can be considered harassment. Also, if you tell a lady that you look nice today, even though she takes it or she accepts it at the time, if you keep doing it, it could lead into something. That's why you have to be so careful when you're doing anything around somebody. See, we're not getting in trouble with a lot of the big cases that make it to the court system anymore. The thing that we're getting in trouble with is usually what we're saying and doing around people. It can be as simple as this. I usually ask everybody, does any group that I'm talking to have any nickname for the people that work with them? And a lot of times everybody's like, yeah, we've got nicknames. And the first question I ask after that is this: can you tell me the nickname? And if they say, no, we can't tell you our nicknames, there is probably something to that. And we need to make sure that these nicknames aren't focused around what we call protected classes. So some of the classes that we actually have: any protected characteristics, sex, age, race, color, disability, handicap, creed, national origin, ancestry, and sexual orientation was added in Georgia June 26, 2020. So now we have to be very careful with what's going on around in our environments, of course, and how we talk to people, we say to each other and everything, because just because you think it's funny may not be that everybody else is going to think it's funny. So harassment is a course of conduct directed at a specific person, and it reasonably could cause emotionally distress in such person, and it serves as no legitimate purpose. It's usually words, gestures, and action would tend to annoy, alarm, or abuse another person, and it can get bad. And it's based on the mistreatment of a protected class, the ones we just kind of went over with before. And it's offensive because it's against federal law, y'all. It's not state or local, it's federal law, which means if it goes that far, we go before a federal judge and he or she will decide our fate. And believe me, that's the last place you ever want to be, is in federal court defending your livelihood. Now, a lot of times these cases are mediated out because it's not going to go that far. But you need to understand what could happen if this proceeds. So if you think you're being harassed, the best thing I can tell you to do is tell that person, and most policies actually ask you to do this, ask them to stop. And everybody's like, well, you know, can't everybody do that? Well, no, because some people are timid. They don't want to rock the boat. And unfortunately, we know each other because we spend a lot of time together. Cities and counties and authorities are like big families. You know, we've known each other for a long time. And sometimes we think we can get away with some stuff that we shouldn't be getting away with. So you got to be careful with that too. So if anything ever is happening, the best thing I can tell you is to write down what happened, who, what, when, where, and how. The more information you have in writing, the better off it's going to be, because we forget dates, times, and places all the time. So it's also beneficial for when you give this information to your HR department, who's usually the one that's going to be doing the investigation. They can go through and say, well, I need to interview, who I need to interview, what we need to talk about, and everything. And sometimes we've even had it come to us being harassed that this person had to go before a professional. Once it goes that far, it goes way beyond just picking with each other. So you definitely have to be careful with what you say and do. Now, let's say it's not you, though. It is a coworker being harassed. So what we actually ask you to do is this. If it seems like it's offensive to you, you need to maybe confront it. Or you maybe even go to that other employee, that other coworker, and say, I felt like this was harassment. Tell me what you are thinking right now, and I think you should go report this. And if for some reason they decide not to report it, you may need to report it. Because if it's offensive to you, it's probably offensive to them. They're just so scared they don't want to go report it because they're scared of what's going to happen to them. So what we need to do is protect each other. Like I said, we say that we're a big family and we want to protect each other. This is the one time that you look past friendships and stuff like that, and you make sure everybody's being protected in the workplace. Even if that person says, I don't want anybody to know about this, it needs to come forward, because as soon as you know about it and we can stop it, the better off it's going to be. So a lot of times,
hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Chris, excuse me for interrupting. Are you changing your slides yet?
Yes.
Okay, because they don't seem to be moving.
Okay, yeah, I'm changing my slides on my side.
Okay, it doesn't seem to be changing.
Okay. Yeah, I've already went through about 3 or 4. So it's not doing it on that side?
No.
Okay.
There it goes.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's it? So you got, okay. So a lot of times what's going on is this. A lot of people say, well, you're always telling us what's against the rules, maybe what's not against the rules, but could lead into it. And this is one of them: persistent efforts by a manager to get a subordinate to do their job, even if the manager is male or female and the subordinate is male or female. It's kind of like this one right here, being asked to do something you don't like. The weirdest one I've ever heard, y'all, was this. I had a guy come up to me after class. He goes, I feel like my supervisor is harassing me. So what can I do about it? I said, well, how about this? Tell me what's going on, and we can kind of look and see if I can help you out. He goes, okay. He said, my supervisor is being mean to me. He told me to go over there and dig that ditch. And I was like, okay, is that all he's doing? He goes, yeah, he told me go over there and dig that ditch. I was like, is he telling you to dig it with your hands or with a spoon or something? He goes, no. He just says, go over there and dig that ditch. I said, well, what's your job title? He goes, I'm a ditch digger. And sometimes it's just the fact that they're asking you to do your job. Now, unfortunately, we do have those equal opportunity, and unfortunately, the word is not the best, but the jerk. And he does this to everyone. So my boss is being mean to me. What exactly does that mean? And it could be different for different people, of course. And being yelled at on the job. And I usually call these people, my supervisors like this, equal opportunity yellers, because they're going to yell no matter what's going on. So why do people hesitate to report harassment and discrimination? Definitely fear of losing their job. Georgia is what we call an at-will state. You can be fired for no cause, you can quit for no cause. Fear of retaliation, getting someone into trouble maybe you've known forever, and you don't want to do that, right? Disrupting the workplace. How about this? Being accused of not having a sense of humor. Everybody else was laughing at the joke, the email, or the joke or something like that. Why aren't you laughing? Well, it might not be that funny, and people just don't understand that sense of humor has nothing to do with if it's being derogatory towards you. Fear of being embarrassed, definitely. Fear of feeling less like a man or a woman, and the fear of not being believed. There are so many times I've done this presentation and people come up to me and say, can I talk to you about this? I've told my supervisor multiple times that this was happening to me, and all they could say is, I don't have time for you, you're too oversensitive, we'll talk about it later, and later never comes. See, that's when you need to start making sure you're documenting it if it's legitimate. But let me explain this to you too. If it's not legitimate, and I've heard this too many times too, I just don't like my supervisor, I don't like my coworkers, and I know if I submit a harassment claim against them, it'll change their life forever, and it will. So what we ask you to do is this. If you don't like your coworkers or your boss, and you're just trying to make somebody else's life miserable, probably the best thing to do is find another job. Maybe that's not the position that you really need. You need something else or something like that. But definitely don't do that as a way of getting back at somebody, because that could ruin their life. So harassment, what does that mean to you and me? Well, it's federal, which means you'll get on that stand, raise your right hand and say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth if it goes that far. Every action, conversation, and written comment will be looked at. And they especially love emails because you can't delete an email, as you know. Another popular thing in court is the telephones or the cell phones, because we know inappropriate information is being pushed and passed through these things on a daily basis, and it is just a matter of time before, if EOC comes in, the first thing they might want to look at, besides the text and the emails and stuff like that on your computers, they're going to ask for it on your phone too. See, they're trying to build a case against this, especially if the employee has a phone that's provided to them by the city, county, or authority. It's not your phone, so you got to make sure you're not doing something inappropriate on there. Also, we've had a court ruling a couple of years ago that says they can actually pull your own cell phone, of course by subpoena, but they can pull your cell phone and see what you were doing during that time that you were supposed to be at work. So we've got to be very careful, especially with these cell phones now. Some other key points: the victim or harasser could be a man or a woman. It does not have to be the opposite sex, of course. Could be anybody from a manager or supervisor, an agent of the employer like a contractor, subcontractor, definitely a coworker, and a non-employee. So that is anyone who you might be dealing with throughout your day of employment. And that's kind of difficult for us to do because a lot of people have dealings with citizens that maybe aren't so happy when they're coming to see you, and you're the first person they see, so everything's dumped on you. Also, we got to be very careful, especially if a city or county has inmates, because we're responsible for them also. So how do you tell if the behavior is inappropriate? You always ask a couple of questions. Would I want this to show up in the newspaper or online? Is there equal power there? Is it two supervisors fighting, or is it a supervisor subordinate fighting, and you know the supervisor has more power? Would the same behavior occur if the harasser significant other was watching? Would I want someone to act this way towards my daughter, my wife, my friend, girlfriend, sister, anything like that, brother? Are both parties initiating and participating equally? And usually it kind of goes back and forth, but sometimes it could be overwhelmingly on the side of the person that's doing the harassing, of course. And that's the stuff you got to stop, because sometimes there's a little bit of inner fighting between, or I'm not sorry, disagreements between coworkers that maybe doesn't lead into the hostile work environment. It's just a disagreement. So there's actually two types of harassment that we usually deal with. Quid pro quo, the easiest way to understand quid pro quo, it is a supervisor-subordinate relationship. Easiest way to understand it. And we always have this question in this statement: you don't get your honey where you get your money, especially words lived by today. As you know, cities and counties can implement a policy that actually kind of helps deter this a little bit. And the policy is actually called a no dating policy. And it pretty much says a supervisor and a subordinate should not be dating, especially if they're in the same office or department. My opinion is a subordinate probably doesn't need to be dating if they're working in the same department on the same shift or something like that, because I can guarantee you, if you fight at home, it's usually coming to work. That's why we have to be so careful with that. Hostile work environment is usually unwelcome comments and conduct. It's focusing on or because protected characteristics. It's offensive to a reasonable person. It's offensive to the victim that it's happening to, and it's usually severe or pervasive. Now, that ranges and definitely, but hostile work environment usually has to have a frequency level there also. So quid pro quo could be a one-time thing, but hostile work environment maybe have to go over a time frame that leads up to something, unless it's so bad, like the situation here. We had a gentleman who had a unique way of welcoming people to work. He would actually walk up behind this person, put his hands into their pockets and move to the front of their body because he thought that was funny. As I told you, just because somebody thinks it's funny doesn't mean somebody else is going to consider it funny. And definitely people that had this happen to them did not consider it to be funny. And it was definitely severe and pervasive enough to become a situation only on one time. Like I said, usually there's a frequency level there. So quid pro quo, the Latin meaning is this for that. So it's an exchange of services, so to speak. The submission to or rejection of sexual attention is made implicitly or explicitly, depends on the vulgarity of the person. It could be as simple as this one that actually got this guy into trouble. There was a guy that had 4 ladies working for him. On a Friday afternoon, he calls them into his office. He says, ladies, there's this raise I have to give at least one of you. Who really wants it? I'll be at my lake house all weekend. That little simple statement got him into a lot of trouble, and he kept saying, well, we were just going to talk about the raise at the lake house, and we kept telling him, look, the fact that you said that you were going to offer them the raise if they had come to the lake house pretty much will put you in that boat of quid pro quo. You have to be careful with what you say and do around people. If you wanted to talk about the raise, you could have got them all into the office together, left the door open, and just talked about maybe their qualifications or their strengths and weaknesses on who should be able to get the raise. That's where you need to decide where the raise should go, not if somebody's going to come and meet you somewhere. Liability for hostile work environment. The employer may be liable for coworker harassment unless it can show a couple of things. There is a policy prohibiting the conduct. There is a complaint process in place. Employees knew of the policy and the process and how to make sure they can submit a complaint, and employees can complain, and the company took prompt and effective steps to stop the harassment and make sure that it does not restart. And it has stopped completely. So that's a couple of things you actually got to look at to make sure that you have a good hostile work environment policy. So we're talking about hostile work environment, behaviors that could be considered unwelcome to people. On the verbal side, we have comments, jokes, stories, not accepting no when asking a person out on a date. Physical side, hugs, kisses, patting, touching. All right, hugs. Georgia is a real big hugging state. We always have been, we always will be. I can assure you of that. So if you are hugging somebody or you're the big hugger in the group, just make sure if somebody says, please don't hug me, just don't hug them anymore. You know, some people don't like that show of affection. So please understand their reasoning behind the fact that they don't want to be hugged. Nonverbal, we have gestures, body movements, elevator eyes, no direct eye contact. That's actually looking at another body feature instead of looking the person in the eye. Suggestive visuals like your posters, your calendars, your pictures, your emails, and facial expressions, even to the point of winking. Now, if somebody winks at you, it probably doesn't mean a lot. They might actually have something in their eye, or naturally they blink a lot when they talk. So don't read a lot into winking, okay? So when we talk about discrimination, employment discrimination, there's actually two types that we deal with. Discrimination can be intended against a group, which is what we call desperate treatment. The example I always give right here is the city, county, or authority said, we're going to offer early retirement this year. And instead of you having an option of choosing whether you're going to take the early retirement, they tell the people who must take it. Now, of course, if they're focusing on the older workers, that is a form of discrimination. Now, it can be unintentional and still create a desperate impact for a group. So this year, what's going to happen is the city, county, or authority has decided that we have to downsize. And downsizing is a bad word when it comes to city and county governments, because we never had to do it in the past. But when you're dealing with downsizing, you got to see who it's going to affect. So this year, what we've got to do, we've got to decrease the budget by 10%. So we're going to get rid of all of our administrative assistants. Now, typically, administrative assistants are female. So unintentionally, they may be going against a protected class of people and not really understanding what's going on or why it is so offensive. It can be that simple. So it can be unintentional. A couple of discrimination acts that we actually deal with. Age Discrimination Act of 67. The city, county, or authority must have at least 20 or more employees to qualify. Most cities and counties don't have to worry about that. Discrimination of people over the age of 40. So if you are over the age of 40, both male or female, you are considered to be in a protected class. Now, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 78, you must have at least 15 or more employees. This actually runs concurrent with the Family Medical Leave Act that says why a person is out having a child or fostering a child or some type of adoption of a child, that they can take some time off. And it's almost like that they are there even though they're not. So anything including hiring, firing, job assignments, promotions, or layoffs, they're always included in that. So you got to remember, just because that person's not there doesn't mean that they can't ask for the pay increase that everybody's getting. They can't apply for a promotion or something like that. They are there even though they're not. And this Pregnancy Discrimination Act today is actually going toward the partner side of the things, saying that the partner of the person can take time off to help care for the child, be there during the birth of the child or the adoption of the child, and it's the same situation. All right. Americans with Disabilities Act 1990, 15 or more employees. It's discrimination under whether this person has the physical ability to do the job. That's what you need to look at. And the only thing you need to remember about Americans with disabilities is a reasonable accommodation without creating undue hardship. So what we need to do is, when we're looking at that, what type of accommodation are they asking for? And I always use this sample. This person actually, there was a guy that got into an accident. He was on workers' comp, he comes back to work on light duty. So they're going to put him in an office answering some phones. Now, he's in a wheelchair for a couple more weeks, so they know that this is probably the best place to put him, making sure he's got a good place to work from. When he comes into his office on the first day, he finds out that his wheelchair will not fit up under the desk. So I always ask the question, what would be a reasonable accommodation here? And a lot of people's like, oh, we can make sure that we change the desk out, we put it up on blocks, or get him a new desk. All those are great, great examples. Now, his request was actually a $30,000 desk that when he comes into the office, he pushes a button, it raises on hydraulics, he pushes another button, it lowers back down on top of him. Now, that's not reasonable for a city or county because it's so expensive. I also had one, I don't know why this person said that. He said, well, you can always let the air out of the tires. Please do not do that. That's a whole different set of situations. And we can get into a lot of trouble with that. So please don't do that. And usually when it comes to Americans with Disabilities Act, it's lasting less than 6 months. The reasonable accommodation is going to take care of everything anyway. All right, Equal Pay Act of 63. All employees are covered under this act. This is actually, which I don't understand why we still have this today, but we do. It's where a lady and a gentleman, equal job description, equal job task, hired at the same time, are not being paid equally. And everybody's like, oh, that doesn't happen anymore. It happens all the time. Where I usually see it is entry-level positions now, where the lady is being paid below entry level. So my first question is always this: why is this person being paid less than the other people? And I always hear this statement: she's not qualified for the job. Well, the fact that you interviewed her and hired her, you just made her qualified for the job, so you need to bring them up to the right amount. Okay? So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 64, 15 or more employees, it's discrimination of people based on sex for pay and benefits. This is a supervisor that thinks he or she has so much power, they can ask for sexual favors before giving out pay and benefits. That takes a lot of nerve, but that is still happening today, and we've got to be careful with that one. Now, the people that actually come in to investigate discrimination and harassment cases is a group called the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, we usually, when they get a claim of harassment, they put it in 3 categories. First category is this: there's nothing to it, the case is closed, the person is given a right to sue letter, they can sue you civilly for 180 days. Next one is they either make a judgment based on the information that they have, or they might send a letter to the city, county, or authority asking for additional information to make their judgment on. Unfortunately, we even have those times when all we hear is this: yes, I'm with EEOC, I'm here to investigate. Y'all, if that ever happens, it is out of our hands. They're there for a reason, and they will turn your city, county, authority upside down and inside out, because they're there for a reason. They know something is happening, and while they're there, they're going to look for other stuff too. This is what we're trying to help stop. We want to make sure it's taken care of internally until it can't be. Behavior in the workplace. The best thing I can tell you to do is this: treat others with respect. That's the key word there. Don't assume everybody shares your sense of humor. If you offend somebody, acknowledge it and say, I'm so sorry, I apologize, because an apology will go a long way. And as a great philosopher once said, but Mr. Barney Fife and Mayberry, you got to nip it in the bud and take care of it as soon as possible. Now, when we talk about retaliation, retaliation is always prohibited. It is broadly defined as almost anything that could make the alleged victim regret coming forward. That is including confronting this person. And unfortunately, it's natural instinct that if somebody accuses you of something, you want to confront them. But that's probably the worst thing you can do. And actually, you can be fired quicker for retaliation than you can the actual offense that you're being suggested that you did. So please make sure you don't confront somebody. Now, some of the retaliation things that I've actually heard about, I've heard of sugar and gas tanks, busted windows. We've even heard of it going to the point of an altercation where people and property gets damaged. And that's the last thing any city or county authority wants to have happen at their work environment. So retaliation needs to be prohibited, just like harassment. But how about this one? A lot of times everybody's like, well, look, we're a big family here. I know you can't confront them, but as a coworker, I'm going to confront that person for you. And it's human nature to want to defend somebody's person. The last thing you should do is do that. Don't do that, please. Retaliation cannot be tolerated regardless of who is engaging in it. So please don't do this. Current state of law does not allow an employer to retain an employee who is unwilling are unable to comply with this policy, it simply means if we know you've done something wrong, we're not supposed to keep you employed at the city or county authority, because it can come back and haunt us on a thing called negative retention. You've got to remember this though. The alleged harasser does have rights too. And this is where a lot of lawsuits usually come out of it, because when a person is accused of it, the first thing they want to do is kick that person out. Get him or her out of here. We don't want to see him. We don't want to deal with him because we don't know what's going to happen. Now, most attorneys will defend you when you go to making sure that that person is no longer in the situation. And it's easier to let that person that is accused of the harassment to go than the person that submitted the claim, because as soon as that person submitted a claim, there is a little bit of protection there, and there's a thing called retaliation, like we talked about, that could come into effect. So last thing you want to do is focus on that person that submitted the claim. Most attorneys will defend you on the person that has the claim submitted against them, but the reason that they're being sent away is to make sure the investigation can be done and nobody's interfering and stuff like that. And most cities and counties know that when this person is removed from the workplace, if it goes that far, they're usually removed with pay pending the investigation. That way, if they're having to be brought back because maybe the claim wasn't true, and that does happen sometimes, it's easier to bring that person back than if it took 3 to 6 months and this person was put on leave without pay. What can you lose in 3 to 6 months? Well, you can lose just about anything. So just remember, they have rights too. So you got to treat them just like everybody else. So a scenario that we'll talk about. An investigation resulted in an employee being disciplined for harassment. The disciplined employee was mad and encouraged others to shun those who participated in the investigation. You have been asked to refuse to speak to your coworkers who reported the behavior to the supervisor. So what do you think you should do? Well, definitely, retaliation is and always will be strictly prohibited. Refuse to participate against the coworker in the retaliation against the coworker. Morale of staff is already low and it has been harmed, and you don't want to contribute to problems any further, and report it to management. Well, we actually, after we talked about this for a little bit, after one of my presentations, this person comes up to me and says, you know what? The fact that you said that we don't need to stand behind the people we work with, I think that's wrong. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, that was my best friend, and no matter what he or she did, I will stand behind them. I said, you know what? You're a great friend. I wish more people were like you, but you got to think about this. If you stand behind that person and they're wrong, what could happen? So you might be standing behind them in the unemployment line if you want to stand behind that person inappropriately. So think about what's going to happen, because people do not pay your bills or anything. You've got to rely on yourself to make sure you have that job and everything like that. So you don't want to put yourself out there if you know that this could possibly be true. You're a great friend if you do it, but it could cost you your job. So we're going to talk about a scenario now. Roy, a longtime battalion chief for municipal fire department, for decades he has employed a management style that promotes a family atmosphere at the fire station he oversees. In doing so, he casts himself as a firefighter father and the other firefighters as each other's brothers and sisters. According to his management approach, he often hugs the firefighters, both male and female, at various points throughout their shift. A recent transfer firefighter who never previously worked under Roy's command, she is not a hugger and consistently pushes Roy away when he attempts to hug her. Roy is persistent, telling Tanya that you just need to understand we're a family here. Family members hug each other, so you might as well go ahead and get used to it. Tanya files a sexual harassment complaint with the city's HR director, who subsequently holds a meeting with the city manager and the fire chief and Roy. Roy is told to stop hugging everyone. He responds by saying, I consider these firefighters to be my sons and daughters. I've been hugging him for over 30 years and I'm too old to stop now. So you might as well go ahead and fire me. In aspiration, the city manager says, well, Roy, can't you at least stop hugging the women? Roy is sad, but agrees to the compromise. From that point forward, he only hugs the male firefighters. Whenever a female firefighter attempts to hug him, Roy pulls away and says, nope, sorry, women don't get hugs anymore. After several weeks of this, Sarah, a firefighter assigned to Roy's station, files a grievance with HR alleging that Roy is discriminating against her and the other female firefighters by withholding hugs from them. In this scenario, it's kind of danged if you do, danged if you don't. But let's see what will happen. What's some of the questions maybe that come from this? All right, since Roy hugged both male and female subordinates, and he didn't intend anything sexual, was Tanya's complaint of sexual harassment invalid? And of course it was not. And the reason is because of this. Even though it wasn't sexual, even though he hugged both male and female subordinates, he was actually told by Tanya, please do not hug me. She even pushed him away multiple times to make him stop. Now, once it comes to that, when he touches her again, it could be considered assault. So that's a whole different thing that we have to deal with then. So just the fact that just because it was both male and female and it wasn't anything sexual, the fact that she asked him and pushed him away, it escalated very, very quickly off of that. Since Roy would only hug male subordinates after Tanya's complaint, was Sarah's discrimination complaint invalid? And it was not invalid because of this. Yes, he was actually treating a protected class differently, the females. Whether he believed it or not, the fact that he would only hug male subordinates got him into trouble. But you got to think about this. He did not make that decision on his own. He was actually told by the city manager, Roy, could you please stop hugging the women? So he was doing what he was told. So he might not be the one that gets into real trouble about this. It could be the city manager that gets in trouble because that was a direct statement of what he should and should not do in the workplace. It was a supervisor telling a subordinate. If the city had known for years that Roy hugged all of his employees, were his rights violated when he was instructed to stop? And unfortunately, his rights were not violated because, as you know, times and things change. What was considered welcome today, or what was considered welcome 20, 30, 40 years ago is not considered welcome today. What was considered welcome this morning may not be considered welcome this afternoon. You've got to be able to change with the times. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of people get into trouble because they're always saying, well, I've been doing it for this many years and nobody said anything about it. Well, now somebody has said it and we're going to have to address it. So changing with times is what we have to really be focusing on. So should the city have handled Tanya's complaint differently? So when you start looking at this, there are a couple of things that they actually could have changed. So when they were talking to Roy and Roy said, I've been hugging these firefighters for over 30 years and I'm too old to stop now, you might as well go ahead and fire me. Unfortunately, you may have to let Roy go to help eliminate the situation. Now, this person has now been let go because another person did not want them to hug him. So a 30-year veteran just was released because he liked hugging people. And usually when it comes to somebody that's been there that long, a lot of people know it. So now the city has to look at this issue that they have to go back periodically to make sure Tanya's not being harassed, discriminated, or even retaliated against. And this is something that may even take more than just 1 or 2 months. It may take multiple years. So just because of that, it doesn't mean anything. But let's say this situation happened. After Tanya reported it, she finally says, you know what? I cannot handle this stuff anymore. So you know what? I quit. Now, everybody's like, oh, well, the case is over with. Unfortunately, it's not, because the fact that you now know that there could be a problem, and just because Tanya was the only one that complained at the time, somebody else may be getting hugged by Roy and he didn't or she didn't like it themselves. So just because the case has been dropped by Tanya doesn't mean that you got to drop the case when it comes to your city, county, or authority. You still have to address the issue, which may even mean getting rid of Roy. And I know that's probably the last thing you want to do, but you want to make sure that you have a safe working environment for all city, county, and authority employees. But let's say everything was fine. All of a sudden, Roy says, okay, I'll stop hugging everybody, and everybody went back to doing what they were doing. But let's say he did get fired, and things went on, and Tanya left. And let's say about 3 months later, and usually this is what happens in most of my fire stations, somebody will call and ask for a reference or ask for comments about a person's work ethic or something like that, and we don't know who's going to answer the phone. So let's say that 3 months later, phone rings and one of the employees pick it up and, yes, sir, I'm Chief Chris Ryan over here in such and such city or county. And what can you tell me about Tanya? She's been applying for a job here as a firefighter. So what do you think you can actually say? And most people, I've actually had this happen. One person says, tell them to don't hug her. No, let's not go there, okay? Even though it may be true, we can get into a lot of trouble by just voicing your opinion. The easiest and best thing to do is this. Hold on 1 second, let me get my supervisor, or especially in most HR or city and county and authorities, they may have an HR department. So maybe you give them the number to the HR department, and the HR department can answer any questions they may have. Because you don't want to be on the hook for anything like that. Anything you might have said or something like that that could limit or not allow this person to get that job, it could come back and haunt us. But let's say you got the information and you send it to HR, and HR gets on the phone and says, yes, how can we help you? And unfortunately, HR is not going to answer a lot of questions either. Usually we're going to answer a couple of questions. Yes, this person was employed, maybe the time frame they were employed, and maybe a job title. That's pretty much well the questions that are going to be answered by HR. Now, a lot of attorneys on the city, county, and authority side fight with this question of asking, would you rehire this person? And the reason is this. If somebody was to call me and say, yeah, we're talking about Tanya, would you rehire Tanya? And the first thing I go is, oh, I don't know. I'm telling you I wouldn't rehire, whether I'm saying it directly or not. So a lot of attorneys say you don't need to even answer that question because it can limit them getting a job somewhere else. Okay? So you don't want to even answer stuff like that, or in vice versa of this. What if that person that answers the phone said, man, I tell you what, Tanya was the best employee we've ever had. We can't function a day without him, but I'm glad you're going to get him. And as soon as they hang up, they're like, man, I'm so glad Tanya's gone. We don't have to deal with her anymore. So you got to take the information with a grain of salt. Usually when it comes to references, you have two different types. You have work references that pretty much are going to tell you when they were there, the position they were there, and stuff like that. A personal reference is a little bit different because these are people that you're actually calling to get the person's character. So that's a little bit of the difference and stuff like that. So we got to be careful with the fact, and the best thing to do is to let HR answer these questions. All right. Any questions that we have, Dennis?
Nope, no questions, Chris.
No questions. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I greatly appreciate the attendance today. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please submit them to me at cryan@lgrms.com, and I will get back with you with an answer. I greatly appreciate it, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank